An hour later, the dark outline of Hyansik's new mansion loomed in the distance, surrounded by high walls and armed guards. As soon as the vehicles halted, doors flew open and boots hit the ground. The second they reached the gates, chaos erupted. Gunfire split the night, bullets slicing through the air as Hyansik's men opened fire without restraint and also throwing poison darts at them. The sharp scent of gunpowder and poison darts filled the compound as Lee's forces retaliated, moving with ruthless precision. Poison darts. They're using poison. Lee's warning echoed through the comms the moment a dart whizzed past him, embedding into a wall. His men quickly adjusted, switching tactics as the battle turned brutal. Mrs. Park's men, fighting alongside Hyansik's, fired the toxic projectiles like vipers striking from the shadows, but Lee's side held strong. One by one, Hyansik's guards fell, their blood marking the marble pathways that led to the mansion's heart. Jihoon and Marie fought shoulder to shoulder, moving like two parts of a single machine. They covered each other's blind spots, tearing through the opposition with practiced efficiency. Amid the chaos, Zhao Miho appeared, firing without hesitation. He cut down several of Lee's men before slipping into the shadows, only to reappear elsewhere, striking again. His rampage ended when Lee caught sight of him, raised his gun, and fired a single shot straight through Miho's skull. The man dropped instantly, lifeless eyes staring into nothing. "Go after Hyansik," Jihoon shouted, reloading quickly. "We'll handle the rest of these flies." Lee nodded once, his eyes cold. "Don't die on me, Jihoon." "Wouldn't dream of it," Jihoon replied with a smirk before turning back to cover Marie. Lee signaled for a handful of his men to follow, and together they stormed deeper into the mansion. Hallways echoed with gunfire as they carved a bloody path forward, taking down every last defender. When they reached the library, Lee halted. Hyansik stood there, flanked by 3 armed guards, the faint lamplight glinting off his gun. "Well, well," Hyansik sneered. "Lee, I told you tonight would be your end." Before Lee could reply, his 2 men were shot dead instantly, collapsing beside him. A poisonous dart sliced through the air toward him, but he ducked behind a bookshelf just in time. Hyansik laughed, a harsh, grating sound filled with arrogance. "Come on, Lee. Where's that fire I used to admire? Hiding already?" Hyansik taunted, pacing slowly. Lee's voice came back cold and controlled. "I killed your last son, Hyansik. Do you want to know how he died?" The laughter stopped. Hyansik's expression hardened, fury flashing in his eyes. "You're lying." "Am I?" Lee whispered, before stepping out just enough to fire a clean shot through one guard's head. The remaining 2 turned instantly, riddling the bookshelf with bullets, but Lee had already moved. He rolled behind another corner, pulling one of the poisoned darts from the floor. He flung it fast, hitting one of the men in the neck, and before the guard could react, Lee's bullet followed, dropping him instantly. The last guard panicked, firing wildly at the spot where Lee had been seconds earlier. Hyansik realized too late that the tide had turned. His confidence vanished. "Damn it," he hissed, backing away. In a desperate move, he bolted out of the library. Lee rose, scanning the room quickly before sprinting after him. When he reached the garage, Hyansik was already in a car, the engine roaring to life. Lee didn't hesitate. He aimed and fired twice. The bullets shattered the tires, the car screeching to a halt. "Hyansik!" Lee shouted, stepping forward, gun raised. "It's over. You can't escape. Get out." Hyansik flung the door open, rage burning in his face. "You think you've won?" he snarled, pulling a dagger from his coat. Lee dropped his gun, drawing his own blade. "Let's finish it the right way." They clashed violently, blades sparking in the dim garage. Hyansik fought with wild desperation, but Lee was faster, calmer, every move precise and deliberate. The clang of steel echoed until Lee finally disarmed him with a sharp twist, slamming the dagger into Hyansik's neck. Hyansik gasped, eyes wide with disbelief, blood pooling at his collar. Lee looked down at him coldly, voice steady. "Your mistake was letting greed and hunger for power consume you when you entered my father's empire." Hyansik tried to speak, but only a gurgle escaped before his body went limp. Lee pulled the blade free and stepped back, watching him collapse onto the cold concrete. When Lee walked back into the mansion, Jihoon, Marie, and the surviving men were waiting in the living room. Marie looked up first, relief flickering across her face. "He's dead," Jihoon said quietly, reading the answer in Lee's expression. Lee nodded once before he spoke. "Let's get out of here." He turned to his remaining men, his tone sharp again. "Burn everything. I don't want a trace of this place left." They obeyed without question. As Lee, Jihoon, and Marie walked out, his men poured fuel through every corridor and room of the mansion. Moments later, the night sky glowed red, the fire consuming everything Hyansik had built. From the road, Lee watched as the mansion collapsed in on itself, smoke curling toward the stars. He said nothing, his face unreadable. Then they all entered into the cars and they drove off. As the convoy drove away into the darkness, the empire of Zhao Hyunsik burned to ashes behind them. That same night, Mrs. Park's study smelled faintly of jasmine and old paper. She sat behind her mahogany desk, the glow of Seoul's skyline glinting off the polished surface. The ticking clock was the only sound until the door opened, and her assistant entered with the careful urgency of someone bearing bad news. He stopped a respectful distance from her chair. "Madam," he began, voice tight, "Hyansik and his son are dead. The men we sent to assist them were also killed." Mrs. Park didn't flinch. Her expression remained perfectly composed, eyes fixed on the glittering city beyond the glass. She folded her fingers together, the silence stretching before she spoke, her tone soft but chillingly measured. "What about their bodies?" The assistant swallowed before replying. "They were burned, madam. Lee ordered his men to destroy everything, including the mansion." Mrs. Park's lips curved faintly, a ghost of a smile or perhaps disdain. "I see," she murmured, the words almost lost in the quiet hum of the city outside. Then, without looking at him, she added, "You may leave." The assistant bowed deeply before retreating from the room, the sound of the closing door echoing through the silence. For a long moment, Mrs. Park remained motionless, her gaze still on the city lights that shimmered far below. The reflection of fire danced faintly in her eyes. Whether from the burning mansion or something far darker within her, no one could tell. That night at her penthouse, Catherine sat on the sofa, scrolling through the dossier Williams had assembled on Natalia. The city lights glittered beyond the glass. The tablet's glow painted her face in pale light. As she read, her phone rang. She glanced at the screen and answered. "It's father," she said, then listened. When he finished, she replied, "I'll represent you at the gala next month." He warned her, voice clipped, to stay away from Adrian Lee. She agreed and the call ended. Catherine looked up to find Williams waiting, hands folded, eyes expectant. "Was Adrian invited?" she asked. "Yes," he answered. She set the tablet aside and spoke with cool clarity. "Mr. Williams, I want you to recruit one of the staff, a waitress, perhaps. I expect Adrian to bring Natalia. If she attends, have the woman drug her drink. Once she's incapacitated, take her to a hotel room." Her words trailed off, unnecessary to finish. Williams understood perfectly. "It will be done, Miss Catherine," he said, bowing slightly before leaving. After the door closed, Catherine stroked Natalia's photo on the tablet, lips curving into a thin smile. "Natalia," she murmured, voice low and venomous, "you'll cease to exist after the gala." That same night, Adrian and the rest of his surviving men returned to the mansion. The air was heavy with exhaustion, and the faint scent of smoke still clinging to their clothes. When he stepped into the living room, he saw Natalia seated on the couch, waiting for him. The moment her eyes met his, she rose quickly and walked toward him. "Are you okay?" she asked softly, her voice laced with concern. "Yes," Lee replied with a brief nod. He exhaled slowly, the tension of the night leaving him little by little. Natalia studied his face for a moment, then smiled faintly. "Do you want to eat noodles with me?" she asked, her tone light, almost shy. He hesitated for a second before his expression softened. "Sure," he said quietly. A few minutes later, they sat together at the dining table, steam curling from their bowls. The quiet clink of chopsticks filled the air as they ate, occasionally exchanging small smiles and soft words. The heaviness of the evening seemed to ease with every passing minute, replaced by a gentle calm neither had expected. When they finished, they rose and started down the hall toward their rooms. Just before parting ways, Natalia turned, hesitating for a moment. Then, with a shy but determined look, she leaned in and pressed a light kiss on Lee's left cheek. "Good night," she murmured, cheeks flushed, before quickly walking away. Lee stood still for a moment, surprised, then a rare smile curved his lips. The following morning, the news of Zhao Hyunsik and his son, Zhao Miho, the national chief of police, shook the entire country. Reports from the police investigation stated that a group of unidentified individuals had stormed their mansion, engaged in a long and violent confrontation, and later set the house ablaze. The media called it a brutal and mysterious attack. But within the city's underworld, The mafia circles and among the powerful elite, everyone knew the truth. They knew that Adrian Lee had finally eliminated his rival after years of a silent, ruthless game between them. And though the city buzzed with speculation, no one dared to speak his name aloud. 1 month had passed since Adrian had completed his revenge, and Natalia had finally recovered from her injuries. The mansion had grown quieter during that time, the chaos of the past weeks replaced by a strange calm that neither of them quite understood. That evening, as the moonlight filtered softly through the wide dining room windows, Natalia sat alone at the long table, eating in silence. The sound of her fork against the plate was the only thing that filled the air, until she heard the steady rhythm of approaching footsteps. When she looked up, Adrian Lee was standing in the doorway, dressed in a black shirt, his expression unreadable. In his hand, he held a sleek clothing box. Without saying a word, he walked over and took a seat across from her. For a moment, neither spoke. Then, with quiet precision, he slid the box toward her. "Open it," he said simply. Natalia blinked, confused but obediently did as he asked. When she lifted the lid, her breath caught. Inside lay a luxurious, body-hugging gown in the color of champagne, its shimmer subtle yet mesmerizing beneath the warm dining light. Her fingers brushed over the smooth fabric, and she looked up at him in surprise. "What is this for?" she asked softly. Adrian's gaze met hers, his voice calm yet carrying an unfamiliar gentleness. "You'll be going with me to a gala tomorrow night," he said. Then, after a brief pause, his next words came with quiet conviction. "You're not coming as a driver, Natalia. You're coming as my woman. I want all of them to know that you're the woman I've fallen in love with." The words lingered in the air, heavy and warm at the same time. Before Natalia could respond, Adrian stood up, his chair sliding back with a low sound against the marble floor. He didn't wait for her to speak. He simply turned and walked out of the room, leaving behind the faint scent of his cologne and the echo of his confession. For a long while, Natalia sat there in silence, staring at the gown. The edges of her lips curved slowly into a soft, disbelieving smile. She lifted the dress out of the box, holding it up against her body, and in that quiet moment, for the first time in years, she allowed herself to feel something she had long forgotten: happiness. That same night, in the dimly lit study of Madame Park's mansion, the air was thick with the scent of aged wood and burning incense. Madame Park sat behind her large mahogany desk, her sharp eyes fixed on the flickering candlelight as her assistant stood beside her, his hands clasped behind his back. "Have you found out why Mr. Park adopted Natalia?" she asked, her tone calm but edged with restrained anger. The assistant hesitated before replying. "Madam, I couldn't find anything concrete on that matter. All records seem clean. Perhaps you're reading too much into it. Maybe he truly wanted to adopt her." Madame Park leaned back in her chair, a cold smile curling on her lips. "Then tell me," she said slowly, her voice lowering to a whisper filled with venom. "Why does that bitch have shares under her name?" The assistant swallowed hard, trying to maintain his composure under her piercing gaze. "It might be that Mr. Park genuinely loved Natalia as his daughter," he said carefully, knowing any wrong word could cost him dearly. For a moment, silence filled the room, heavy and tense. Madame Park's expression remained unreadable as she drummed her manicured fingers against the desk, lost in thought. Then, with a slight nod, she waved her hand dismissively. "You may go," she said curtly. The assistant bowed quickly and turned to leave, relief flickering across his face. As the door clicked shut, Madame Park's cold eyes shifted toward the family portrait hanging on the wall. Her lips twisted into a bitter smirk. "Loved her as a daughter?" she murmured under her breath. "We'll see about that." The following night, Adrian Lee stood in the living room, already dressed in a luxurious black suit that framed his tall, commanding figure. His watch gleamed under the warm light, but his mind was elsewhere, waiting. The faint ticking of the clock filled the silence until he finally heard the sound of footsteps descending the stairs. When he looked up, the world seemed to pause. Natalia was standing there, wrapped in the champagne gown he had given her. The fabric hugged her figure perfectly, shimmering softly with every step she took. For a moment, Adrian forgot to breathe. He had seen her countless times before, but never like this. Natalia walked toward him with a quiet grace, her lips curved into a soft smile, her eyes glinting with a mix of shyness and confidence. When she stopped in front of him, Adrian's throat felt dry. "You look so beautiful," he finally said, his voice low and honest. Natalia laughed lightly, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "We should get going now," she said, breaking the charged silence between them. Moments later, the two of them were seated in the back seat of the sleek black car, the city lights spilling through the tinted windows as it pulled away from the mansion. Adrian's gaze, however, never left her. He watched her reflection in the glass, the way her fingers fidgeted slightly with the hem of her gown, the faint blush painting her cheeks under his steady stare. "It seems I'll have to buy more of these kinds of dresses for you," he murmured finally, a teasing edge slipping into his tone. "Because, damn, you look wow." Natalia turned to him, caught off guard by his candid words, and burst into laughter, soft, genuine, and warm. The car eased up to the gala's curb, and the world beyond the tinted windows felt like a different country. Bright lights, a knot of security, uniforms and earpieces moving like ants. Adrian stepped out first and, without a word, reached for Natalia's hand to help her from the car. The champagne gown caught the light. For a heartbeat the throng fell away and the room's murmur thinned to a hush. Faces turned. Some guests had seen Natalia before, but never like this. They had barely taken 2 steps into the hall when Catherine and her assistant materialized through the crowd. Catherine walked forward, all polished composure and the blade of ambition beneath it. "Lee, good to see you again," she said, her voice smooth. For a second Adrian's face blanked. The woman's name hovered on the edge of memory until Mr. Williams supplied it. "Mr. Lee, Miss Catherine is Mr. Derek's daughter. You met her in New York last year." The recollection snapped into place. Adrian's eyes narrowed, a cold smile forming. "You're the one whose hands I broke when you tried to touch me in New York," he said flatly. "I see you've recovered well." Silence tightened around them. Catherine and Williams were momentarily speechless. Catherine recovered first, and with the knife edge of her smile directed herself at Natalia. "You must be Natalia, his driver, I presume?" she said, the question posed like a test. Adrian stepped forward as if to shield the moment, his voice low and sure. "No. She's the woman I am going to marry." The words landed in the room like a gavel. Adrian closed the distance between himself and Catherine, tone dropping to a danger that made even the security staff stiffen. "I don't want to see your face again," he told her. "If I do, I won't only break your hands, I'll break your legs too." He spoke without flourish. The menace in his calm carried the iron of someone used to getting results. Then he turned and took Natalia's arm, guiding her toward friends and allies whose nods and small smiles welcomed them into the gala's social orbit. Catherine stood rooted a moment, color draining as humiliation flared hot and sharp behind her mask. She looked to Williams, and the professional composure returned like a skin. "Miss Catherine, shall I proceed with the plan?" Williams asked softly, voice careful. Catherine's mouth thinned. She gave the single, crisp order. "Yes. Do it." Williams inclined his head and melted into the crowd, already moving to set their darker arrangements into motion, while Catherine watched Adrian and Natalia disappear into the swirl of the evening, the taste of defeat bitter on her tongue. While Catherine fumed quietly from across the room, Adrian and Natalia mingled among the glittering crowd. The air shimmered with polite laughter, crystal glasses, and the low hum of music from the live orchestra. Adrian moved with the calm confidence of a man in his element, introducing Natalia to his business associates. Powerful men in tailored suits, their wives smiling with practiced grace. Each time she was introduced, Natalia bowed slightly, her poise earning approving glances. Though she wasn't used to such circles, her calm presence beside Adrian only deepened his quiet pride. After a while, Natalia leaned closer and smiled. "I'll go look around for a bit," she said softly. "Don't disappear on me, Mr. Lee." Adrian chuckled under his breath, the sound low and warm. "I'll be right here," he promised, his gaze following her as she drifted away into the golden light of the hall. Natalia's steps were unhurried as she admired the lavish decor. The chandeliers glinting like frozen stars, the marble floors reflecting the soft amber glow of the candles. Guests passed by with flutes of champagne and soft laughter, their perfume and cologne mixing in the air like a carefully orchestrated symphony of wealth and power. She paused near a floral arrangement, her eyes drawn to the quiet elegance of the roses. It was then that a waitress approached, young, polite, her expression unreadable beneath the professional smile. Balancing a silver tray with practiced ease, she stopped in front of Natalia and bowed slightly. "Miss, would you like a glass of wine?" she asked, her tone gentle, almost too gentle. Natalia looked up, unaware of the eyes that watched her from a distance, and returned the smile. "Yes, thank you," she said softly. The waitress nodded and offered the glass with both hands. Natalia accepted it, her fingers brushing the cool crystal. "Enjoy your evening," the waitress murmured before retreating into the crowd. When Natalia took the first sip of the wine, nothing seemed out of place. The taste was smooth, rich, and deceptively pleasant. She drifted through the hall, sipping absently as she admired the decor, moving from one corner to another with quiet grace. But as she stepped into the smaller gallery where the paintings hung, away from the noise and laughter, something shifted. A heat began to bloom in her chest, spreading fast through her veins like wildfire. Her skin flushed, her breathing grew shallow. She clutched at her dress, feeling her pulse pound against her skin. The world tilted slightly, her vision blurring at the edges. She blinked hard, trying to steady herself, and that was when she knew someone had drugged her. The wine. Someone had slipped her an aphrodisiac, and not a mild one. It clawed through her body mercilessly, leaving her trembling, dizzy, fighting to think through the haze. She tried to move, but her steps faltered. The edges of the room seemed to bend. The waitress who had given her the drink had been watching from a distance. When he saw her stagger, he immediately approached, feigning concern. "Miss, are you all right?" she asked, reaching out as if to steady her. Natalia slapped her hand away, her eyes sharp even through the blur. "Don't touch me," she hissed, staggering backward. She turned slightly, pulling out her phone. Her voice was low, hurried. Moments later, the door opened, and 3 men stepped in. Their smiles were wrong, too calm, too certain. One of them handed the waitress a bundle of cash. "Get out," he ordered, and the woman obeyed without a word. "Boss said to carry her to one of the hotel rooms," one of the men said, his voice rough with anticipation. Natalia's body burned, her thoughts a storm of confusion and anger. She could barely focus, but somewhere inside the haze, instinct kicked in. She forced herself to breathe, to stay upright. Back at the main hall, Adrian had been waiting for Natalia, scanning the crowd. When she didn't return after several minutes, a faint unease coiled in his chest. He excused himself politely, eyes sharp, scanning every face and corridor. That was when the faint echo of a gunshot reached him. The sound cut through the music, faint but unmistakable. His expression hardened instantly. Without hesitation, he moved toward the source of the sound, his stride quick and precise. In the painting room, the situation had erupted. The 3 men closed in, their grins feral. "Damn, she looks so hot," one of them said under his breath. Another chuckled darkly. "Yeah, this one's special." Natalia's chest rose and fell rapidly, her mind screaming through the haze. She waited until the first man came close. Then she moved. Her fist shot forward, slamming into his jaw with a sickening crack. The man stumbled back, cursing in shock, and before he could react, Natalia snatched the gun from his pocket. The next sound was deafening, a single sharp gunshot. The man fell instantly, blood pooling beneath him. Her breath came in ragged bursts, her hands shaking as she gripped the weapon. Her vision swam, her body screaming against her control. She bit down hard on her lower lip, the pain anchoring her to the moment. The metallic taste of blood filled her mouth, but it helped just enough. One of the remaining men stared in disbelief. "Even after being given that dose, she can still fight," he muttered. "This woman's strong." Natalia's arm trembled as she aimed, but her shot went wide, splintering a frame on the wall. The men began to circle, spreading out. She shifted, calculating, forcing her eyes to focus. Another shot rang out. This time it hit. One man screamed as the bullet tore through his knee, sending him crashing to the floor. "Shoot her," he shouted to the last man, his voice hoarse with pain. The second man raised his weapon and fired, but Natalia dove behind a pillar, the bullet grazing past her arm. She steadied herself, her head spinning, and returned fire. Her shot struck his leg, sending him sprawling. The room fell into chaos, groans, blood, the stench of gunpowder. Natalia's knees gave out, and she hit the floor hard, her body shaking violently. By then, Adrian was almost there. Another shot echoed, sharp and final, and his pace quickened. When he burst through the door, the sight that greeted him ignited a fury that burned hotter than anything he had ever felt. Natalia lay on the floor, her skin pale and glistening with sweat. Around her, one man was already dead, a gunshot wound to the chest. The other 2 writhed on the ground, clutching their bleeding legs. The room smelled of smoke and blood, and in the middle of it all stood Natalia, his woman, collapsed, trembling and barely conscious. Adrian moved to her without hesitation, every step measured as if the world had narrowed to the single figure trembling on the floor. When he leaned over Natalia, the diagnosis was instant and grim: she'd been drugged. Her arms folded around him in a clumsy, desperate hug. Whatever had been slipped into her wine made her hands roam, and her lips seek his with an eagerness that was not hers to give. Adrian's face hardened. With one strong, uncompromising motion, he took both of her hands in a single grip to stop her, his touch firm and protective rather than possessive. He held her there for a moment. Then, with the other hand, he snatched up his phone and barked orders. Within 5 minutes, his men filled the doorway like a disciplined shadow. "Find out who did this," he commanded, voice flat and bright with barely contained fury. "I want everyone involved dragged in front of me." "Yes, sir," came the immediate reply, and they fanned out, checking exits, questioning stunned staff, sweeping the venue for any trace of the men who had walked in with cash and intent. Adrian crouched beside Natalia, studying her. Pupils blown, breath ragged, skin clammy. After a split second's consideration, he pressed the pad of his thumb to her temple to steady her. Then, with a motion as careful as it was inexorable, he knocked her out with the gentlest, surest tap, better unconscious and safe than delirious and exposed. Cradling her like something fragile and priceless, he carried her through the stunned, whispering crowd to the waiting car. The driver started at his command, tires spitting gravel as they tore away from the gala and raced back to the base. Behind them, Lee's men moved with lethal purpose, combing the hall, downloading camera feeds, and chasing every lead. Whoever had dared to touch what belonged to Adrian Lee had just declared war on a man who would not rest until every hand involved had been revealed and made to answer. In the back seat of the car, Lee's fingers drummed against the leather as he spoke sharply into his phone, his voice low and controlled yet edged with urgency. "Get to my place immediately," he instructed the doctor, outlining in clipped sentences what had just happened. Within 10 minutes, Lee was carrying Natalia, who had awoken in the car just 5 minutes prior, into one of the bathrooms of his room. He placed her under the shower, letting the cold water cascade over her. She didn't seem to care. Her hands roamed over him in a haze that sent his mind into chaos. "Did you want to kiss her back?" "Yes, more than anything, but not like this, not under the influence of someone else's poison." He clamped his hands firmly on her shoulders, forcing her still, holding back a desire he could not indulge. 2 hours under the relentless cold had a minimal effect. Natalia was calmer, but the haze of the drug still lingered. Lee lifted her from the shower, her wet hair clinging to her face, and called for one of his female staff. Within 5 minutes, Natalia had been carefully dressed, lying on the bed, still moaning softly as the last traces of agitation clung to her body. Minutes later, the doctor arrived, his expression tight with focus as he assessed the scene. Without hesitation, he injected a precise dose of medicine into Natalia, watching as her body finally relaxed under the influence. He handed Lee another vial, instructing him to administer it carefully. "She'll be okay," the doctor said, his voice calm but firm. "I'll return tomorrow morning to check on her." With that, he left, leaving Lee alone with her. Lee sat on the edge of the bed, the quiet of the room heavy around him. He administered the medicine to Natalia, ensuring she received every drop. Her breathing deepened, her body easing into unconsciousness, and he watched her carefully, the tension in his shoulders slowly loosening as he noted the gradual effect. Finally, after a long moment of silent vigilance, he rose, his gaze lingering on her for a heartbeat longer before stepping quietly out of the room, leaving her to rest and recover fully from the ordeal. Back at the gala building, Catherine sat in one of the private rooms, her fingers drumming impatiently on the armrest of the chair as she waited for the good news. The excitement that had thrummed through her earlier now gave way to tense anticipation, her sharp blue eyes scanning the room as if the walls themselves could bring her the report she wanted. Minutes later, Mr. Williams, her ever-loyal yet increasingly nervous assistant, entered, closing the door behind him with a quiet click. "How did it go?" Catherine asked, her voice sharp with eagerness, her posture taut, ready to spring at any sign of success. "Miss, we failed," Williams replied, his tone hesitant, eyes flicking nervously to her as if expecting a storm to descend at any moment. Catherine's heart sank slightly, but anger surged quickly, hotter and more immediate. "Failed?" she hissed, rising to her feet, her fury radiating in every movement. Her hand shot out, striking Williams across the face with a sharp, stinging slap. He didn't flinch further, absorbing the hit with a grim expression, knowing her temper was both fearsome and precise. "How can you be so useless?" she demanded, her voice slicing through the tense air. "This plan was perfect, and you failed to deliver." Williams ran a hand over his reddened cheek, swallowing hard. "Miss, I didn't know Natalia could fight like that, even with the dosage we administered. She took care of the men before they could even touch her." Mr. Lee intervened and took her away immediately. Catherine's eyes narrowed, a dangerous gleam igniting in their depths. The realization that Lee had not only anticipated the move, but had also protected Natalia sent a ripple of frustration and fear through her. "Miss Catherine," Williams continued, his voice tight, "we truly need to leave. Mr. Lee's men are already questioning the workers, and if they trace the waitress, we're in big trouble. Now is the time to pull out before it's too late." Catherine's fists clenched at her sides, the plan she had so meticulously plotted crumbling in the span of a few moments. Her mind raced, calculating the consequences, imagining Lee's quiet, infuriating confidence as he had neutralized every step of her scheme. Catherine inhaled sharply, her shoulders stiff, her lips pressing into a thin line as she processed the failure. Rage, humiliation, and the gnawing sense of being outmaneuvered coiled tightly within her. "Fine," she spat, her voice controlled but venomous. "Let's get out of here." "But this isn't over." "Not by a long shot." Williams nodded silently, moving to follow her, and together they slipped from the room. Immediately upon exiting the building, Catherine froze as she saw several of Lee's men waiting silently in the shadows, their presence imposing and unmistakably calculated. One of them stepped forward, expression unreadable, and spoke in a calm but firm voice. "Miss Catherine, my boss wants to see you." Catherine recoiled, stammering, disbelief and fear mingling in her tone. "What do you mean by that?" "Your boss told me to get out of his sight tonight." "So what do you mean he wants to see me?" The man's lips curved into a small, knowing chuckle before he continued. "We've taken the surviving men, and also the waitress you bribed. We've secured the video footage as well. Although you destroyed the cameras, we were able to retrieve the recordings. So, Miss Catherine, you can come with us willingly, or we can bring you by force. The choice is yours." William stepped forward. "Miss Catherine is Mr. Sanders Derrick's daughter. Do you know what you're getting yourself into?" But the man only chuckled again, shrugging his shoulders as though her family meant nothing in the face of his boss's authority. "Mr. Sanders has to bow his head in front of my boss. My boss was the one who helped your father become what he is today. So, Mr. Williams, do you think I should be afraid?" His tone was indifferent, carrying the weight of absolute command. "I don't want to talk too much. Get into the car now." Catherine swallowed hard, her mind racing. The anger and pride that had fueled her fury now mingled with the gnawing anxiety of imminent capture. She hesitated for a split second, glancing at Williams, who gave her a barely perceptible nod of warning. The reality of the situation left her with no choice. With a reluctant step forward, she entered the waiting car, her hands trembling slightly as the door clicked shut behind her. Williams followed immediately, sliding into the seat beside her, his expression a careful mask of calm as he tried to keep Catherine from panicking. The drive to Lee's mansion was heavy with unspoken tension, the city lights flickering past the windows as Catherine's mind whirred with thoughts of confrontation, revenge, and the inescapable power of the man she had so severely underestimated. Thank you so much for watching episode 5 of Seoul Vendetta. What do you think will happen next? Share your thoughts and theories in the comments. I'd love to hear them. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss episode 6. See you soon.